Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I welcome the announcement of the prosecutions on Hillsborough and congratulate the families and all those involved in the many years of campaigning to achieve justice. Mr Speaker, the Scottish Secretary insisted that Scotland would see increased funding if the DUP secured money for Northern Ireland as part of a confidence and supply deal, insisting, as I quote, "I am not going to agree to anything that could be constructed as backdoor funding to Northern Ireland." Did the Prime Minister receive any representations from the Scottish Secretary about the DUP deal, either before or after it was signed?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman that, of course, when we look at what has happened in terms of funding for the rest of the United Kingdom, in the autumn statement last year, my right honourable friend the Chancellor set aside an infrastructure fund of £23 billion. We're putting more money into our NHS, more money into our schools, and of course there is an impact on Scotland as a result of that autumn statement. £800 million extra spending is going to Scotland. As a result of the budget, £350 million extra is going to Scotland. I don't remember when that money was announced for Scotland, the honourable gentleman complaining about that more money should be going to Northern Ireland. But then, of course, he's a nationalist and not a unionist.
Ian Blackford! Punishment then.
Mr Speaker, the Prime Minister's failure to give a straight answer to that question speaks volumes.
Let's hear the fella, Mr Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker.
No respect.
The Prime Minister's failure to give a straight answer to that question speaks volumes and has only succeeded in piling more pressure on the Scottish Secretary, whose position now looks less secure with every day that passes.
The honourable gentleman's question, and I think he's reaching his peroration, must be heard.
I will give the Prime Minister one more opportunity. Did she receive any representations about the DUP deal from the Secretary of State for Scotland? Yes or no?
I can assure the honourable gentleman that I regularly receive representations from the Secretary of State for Scotland about matters relating to Scotland, including regular representations which point out that if the Scottish nationalists actually have the interests of Scotland at heart, they will want to remain part of the United Kingdom.
Marion!
Thank you, Mr Speaker. After being fairly defeated by my honourable friend, the member for Perth and North Perthshire, this government has nevertheless seen fit to award the defeated candidate and give the unelected Ian Duncan a peerage and a job in the Scotland office. Instead of this affront to democracy, and in light of the need for a legislative consent motion at Holyrood, does she not think she should stop treating the Scottish people with contempt and do the right thing and give the Scottish government a seat at the Brexit negotiations table?
We have, throughout the time that we've had so far in relation to the Brexit issue, been working with and talking with the Scottish Government and indeed other devolved administrations, and we will continue to do that. And I hope and trust, from the nature of the honourable gentleman's question, that this means that from now on the Scottish nationalists are going to be focused on issues that matter to Scotland other than independence.
Ian Fellows!
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The brave men and women in our emergency services have consistently put the safety of others first, and especially in response to the terrible events we've seen in recent months. We all pay tribute to their professionalism. That's why I believe it's important that we give them all the resources they need to do their vital job. In Scotland, it's outrageous that police and fire services are required to pay VAT. This costs frontline services £35 million.
Order! Order! Order, Mr Cleverly. Order. You are usually the embodiment of calm, repose and potential statesmanship. Take some sort of tablet, man. Mrs Fellows must be heard.
Thank you again, again, Mr Speaker. I'll repeat that. In Scotland, it's outrageous that our police and fire service are required to pay VAT, and this has cost the frontline services £35 million last year alone. Now that the Prime Minister has found the magic money tree, will she extend the VAT exemption to Police Scotland and the rest?
We've got the gist of it. The Prime Minister.
When the Scottish Government took the decision to merge Scottish police forces into a single force, Police Scotland, they were told that this would lead to VAT being paid by Police Scotland. They were advised that that was the position, and they chose to go ahead with the merger.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I rise to address matters pertaining to security arising from the gracious speech. As I do so, I speak to the SNP's amendment, which urges the Government to exempt Police Scotland and Scottish Fire and Rescue from VAT without further delay. In the matter of police and fire service cuts, I'm very happy to say that the Scottish Government has not imposed the sort of cuts that have been seen south of the border. In Scotland, the Scottish Government have increased police numbers, and in particular we've invested in increasing the number of trained police armed responders while still balancing our budget. And Mr Speaker, we've been able to do that despite the UK Government's repeated refusal to remove the burden of VAT from Police Scotland. Police Scotland is the only territorial police authority in the United Kingdom unable to recover VAT. I and my Scottish Government colleagues have repeatedly raised this issue with the UK Government. I wrote to the Minister about the issue earlier this year. The SNP have tabled an amendment to the gracious speech calling on the Government to rectify this anomaly, and we call on them again to do that today. We've recently rectified the anomaly for a number of other national bodies. Now it's time to do it for Police Scotland. But notwithstanding the Tory Government's failure to rectify that anomaly, the contrast between Scotland and the United Kingdom in policing terms couldn't be starker. 20,000 police officers have been lost in England, but in Scotland we've maintained 1,000 more than the number we inherited when the SNP first came into government in 2007. And we've also taken steps to increase the number of police officers who are trained to carry firearms. In the days following the Manchester attack, Police Scotland were able to provide the heightened level of police cover, including armed policing, without having to call on the resources of the military. We've also protected the police resource budget in Scotland, whereas since 2011 in England, the Home Office has cut the amount it's spent on policing by 20%. So it's time for the party opposite to stop diverting attention from their under-resourcing of police and emergency services, and to follow the Scottish Government's lead in giving the police and emergency services the resources they need.